want to begin this week's lore series with a question. What if you yourself were the very thing that got in the way of your goals? Meaning, you have these grand plans to make your world a better place, right? Maybe it's something really lofty like eradicating disease and suffering or solving poverty, but you were unable to attain these great things because there was something in your very nature that was so broken, you'd never be able to achieve that kind of greatness. A character flaw that goes deeper than anything else. How far do you keep trying, and when do you know when to give up? This week we are exploring the Lumineth Realm Lords, the newest faction to be added to Age of Sigmar, and I could not be more excited, and if you want to follow along, be sure to hit subscribe. The Lumineth are an interesting faction to cover because it's not just the story of a people, but the story of their god and their home as well. Hysh and Teclis both play an integral part of this story. But what I need to do to kind of get the lore out there is break them up just a little bit. I'm going to do a video on Teclis, one on Hysh, and so on. And so today we're really going to focus on the Lumineth Realm Lords themselves. It's a tragic story, but also the setup for an incredible faction. When the twin gods of light, Teclis and Tyrion, awoke in Hysh, Realm of Light, they were saddened to find so few elves amongst the land. In fact, in their own realm they didn't find any. And even after reuniting with Sigmar, he had a few elves, a few populations here and there, but many of them didn't want to be uprooted from Azir to go to Hysh. It wasn't until the later days of the Age of Myth that a clever plan was put into effect, and one that we've talked about many times. And I will go into again more on the Teclis video. Basically, in the old world, Slaanesh had devoured so many elven souls that the race was on the brink of extinction coming into Age of Sigmar. But Morathi, leader of the Daughters of Cain, had escaped the depraved god's gullet. And so a plan was set in motion to capture the god of excess, Slaanesh, and take back the elven souls within it. Thousands of souls were pulled out, some broken, which would later become something like the Idoneth Deepkin, some having strange mutations but otherwise kind of mentally pure, and that's how we get like the Caneri and the Melusai of the Daughters of Cain. But despite all the horrors inflicted upon them, some souls came out pristine, a shining example of what an elf could be. It was these souls that made their way to Hysh, under the guidance and protection of Tyrion and Teclis. This is the starting point of the true Elves of Hysh, a chance to begin again, to breathe new life into a dying race. Right? In this time, as opposed to the old world, things could be different, they could be better. A world without hubris and strife, founded here in the land of enlightenment. The elves that were brought into Hysh quickly blossomed. They spread to all corners of the 10 domains of Hysh. Great towers were built, schools, colleges, cities, and more. Teclis himself sat and taught his children everything he knew, and the new elves becoming even more powerful in the arts of magic than their old world kin. And Teclis, seeing the potential here for these elves to blossom on their own, gave them a gift. The knowledge of how to mine ether quartz, which is the realm stone of Hysh. And we'll cover that resource a bit more when we talk about in Hysh in a dedicated video, but this realm stone presents itself as a solid form of light that can be harvested. And ether quartz was researched and kind of set off a massive gold rush, right? Because it could make warriors more deadly, engineers more creative, artists would reach new heights. It was, again, it's a realm stone based on enlightenment and inspiration and all these very positive, mental, lofty things. And an explosion of knowledge and power shook the Elves of Hysh in this realm stone, and at a rate at which it was being researched meant there was just limitless potential. And maybe it was optimism or perhaps denial, but Teclis and Tyrion both failed to see the seeds of pride taking root in the heart of their people. Remember that question I opened up with just a minute ago, right? You have limitless potential, but your very nature means you can never achieve the greatness you set out for. Arrogance is an insidious disease upon the soul, and no race is more susceptible than the elves. The limitless potential soon turned to a dark chapter in their history. Greed saw the production of ether quartz become increasingly cutthroat. Researchers began keeping their works secret, kind of becoming paranoid that others were stealing their ideas. In the courts and councils of leaders, they secretly whispered about ways to kind of, knock their rival kingdoms down a peg, show them that we are number one. And slowly, they began to start seeing each other as competition, and then as rivals, and ultimately as enemies. All the while that diplomatic relations are crumbling from hubris and greed, Aethercourt's research goes into overdrive. Fantastic weapons of unparalleled destruction are created, things that would tear the fabric of reality apart. But of course, there were a bunch of handshake deals between all these elves saying, oh, we'll never use these, we just wanted to see if we could create it, but we'll never use it, don't worry about it. And that's like the upper echelon, but for the lower levels of society, things were going a bit mad as well. War, fever, and paranoia had trickled down to the civilians, where they started accusing each other of researching the magics and power of chaos and demons. And what you essentially had was a cold war between nations up top, right? They're all building these bigger, better weapons, trying to show off, knock each other down a peg, prove that we have, the most dangerous weapons imaginable. But at the lower level, like in your day-to-day, interacting with other civilians, you have a witch hunt. Everyone's jockeying for superiority and seeing baseless accusations as an easy way to eliminate a rival. And while the introduction of Aethercourts didn't necessarily spark this kind of thing, it's not that an evil, substance or anything like that, it ramped up its timetable considerably. I just think it kind of exacerbated an already existing flaw in the hearts of elves. More weapons were built, more civilians were turned against one another, and towers and monuments and colleges grew ever larger in an effort for them to outdo one another. And all of this reached a point of critical mass. Hubris and greed had turned what were once trusted friends into hated enemies. Tyrion and Teclis were away, perhaps, pulling more souls from Slaanesh, or they were, in the company of Sigmar and his pantheon, which they were trying to save face and still be a participants in. But their absence isn't the cause of what happened next, but it surely didn't stop it. The event known as the Spirefall was a devastating time in Elven history. We don't know who struck first, but all of that pent-up rage and pride and emotion that we've been talking about was finally unleashed. Weapons that were never meant to be used against mortals were dropped upon rival houses. Devastating magics of fire and death were hurled from one wizard to another, and it almost seemed like the elves at this point had a plan of mutually assured destruction, that the minute one of them pulled the pin on a grenade, they'd just all throw everything they had at one another. What seems like overnight, everything that Tyrion and Teclis had built in Hysh with these elves came crashing to its foundation. Some of these weapons were so powerful they tore the veil between the mortal realms and the realm of chaos, demonettes in particular, flooding into Hysh. This is their story of the Age of Chaos, and when evil came to their doorstep. Now, there were some far-out places within Hysh that kept a more level head, right? Maybe they just weren't as involved in politics or science, but these far-spread survivors became the last bastion of order amid the teeming swarms of chaos warbands and demons, and of course, there's still elves who are out of their minds trying to nuke each other. And it's at this point in the story that Tyrion reappears. And because he's such a master of war and martial prowess, he's able to kind of take these pockets of resistance across the realm, bring them together, and help them survive their self-imposed destruction. But Teclis, the mage brother, did not return, despite the prayers and cries of his people. One of the things we'll explore as we talk about the realm is that Hysh is kind of divided down the center, right? Yeah, we all know the realms are a disc, divided down the center. Half is for Tyrion, half is for Teclis. And the Teclis half, though they survived, were feeling abandoned. The Spirefall had opened their eyes to their own hubris, and the consequences were so severe that it gave them a real perspective of their own ignorance. Nearly a month after the Spirefall kind of died down, because it was a long-term event, it wasn't just like a one-night thing, Teclis returned to his people. And we'll talk more about what he was up to later, but understand that as all hell was breaking loose, he was in deep meditation on how to further understand the nature of the realms and live in harmony with them. Basically, how do I stop my people from being like this? Coming home and seeing the destruction that his children had wrought, Teclis felt a twinge of pity and remorse. He could see how broken they were, those aspects of elven life that kept them from truly achieving greatness. With the few survivors left on his, hemisphere, I guess you could say, of the realm, Teclis set to the harsh task of rebuilding his people in a realm now flooded with chaos. But he had learned much in his time of study, and there was a glimmer of hope remaining for his people. From the ashes of the Spirefall, Teclis would reunite his people, and together they would rise like a phoenix, wiser and more powerful than ever before. This tragedy, the Spirefall, is the birth of the Lumineth Realm Lords. And I want to end that story segment here because it's a great stopping point where you have this pre-Spirefall elves, and after this, reuniting of Teclis, they become something new. And so I want to talk about why are these origins so awesome. The idea that something in you is just flawed is fascinating, right? We have it, we call it human nature. It's why a lot of us don't trust, religion or government establishments, because people are crummy, and so the things that they inevitably get into are sometimes crummy as well. And it's like that, but a very focused, alien version of it, where the elven nature, so to speak, naturally leads to arrogance and self-destruction, but on an apocalyptic scale. And yet, they are accurately seen as a species of limitless potential. They could do incredible things, but they squandered it, just like they did in the old world and devolved into civil war. I like how the book describes this slow roll to self-destruction, and I didn't cover every detail because, as always, I want you to go read these things for yourselves, but it started so subtly that it's stupid, right? Is my tower bigger than my friend's? Is my robe whiter than his? Is it made of better fabrics? How does, the purity of my refined ether quartz compare to somebody else's? And all these are very trivial things, but here's the problem. What is your worst personality trait magnified 1,000 times, right? For the elves here, it was arrogance and pride that led them down this road. And it was supercharged by the power and innovation potential of ether quartz. I think it just accelerated what was already going to happen. The idea of a Cold War brewing and a witch hunt among civilians hits fairly close to home, as I am a fan of American history. This overall blanket of unease and distrust of your neighbor is both highly infectious and cripplingly dangerous for any society. And it's easy to create a feedback loop that propels people towards destruction, right? Leaders say that those other elves are trying to infiltrate our kingdom, and citizens begin persecuting one another as spies with no evidence at all. The leaders look at this, all these alleged spies, and say, yep, here's the proof. And so it just kind of goes in circles of, information being fed to one another. It's a runaway train, and Teclis and Tyrion weren't around to keep it on the track. All in all, their downfall, the Spirefall, is a fascinating story and one that I'm excited to continue in tomorrow's video as we try to comprehend exactly what rose from the ashes of this self-defeat. I like these kinds of videos that start on a somber note, and I don't know why, I like the idea of a triumphant return. I felt the same way with the Cities of Sigmar, where, the first story that you really get in that battle tome is utter defeat, and then it's how do we take this and move it into something, based purely on hope? And I love it. So tell me your thoughts. What do you think of the Spirefall? I wish we knew a little bit more about the pre-Age of Chaos elves, those different domains, but we do get to see their kind of new reflection later on in the battle tome, so I am excited to dive into those. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you in my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Happy wargaming. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that video. It was made possible by the folks over here to the left. These are my top supporters over here on YouTube and on Patreon that keep this channel going. If you'd like to learn more about how to become a supporter and get some cool things in the process, like exclusive pictures and interactions with me and get your questions answered here on the channel, go ahead and click any of the links down below or the join button on the community page over on YouTube. Regardless of your choice, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me with this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Happy wargaming.